From birth scenes that are straight up traumatic to moments that make you question just which side is supposed to be good in this story, House of the Dragon definitely went too far sometimes, like when they showed Emma's labor complications in the very first episode.
Don't be scared.
I mean, everyone knew this was a Game of Thrones prequel, so in some way, I guess I should have known what I was getting myself into. But still, no one could have predicted a scene this disturbing within minutes of seeing the HBO logo. The infamous bloody history of the Targaryens includes a lot of deaths, including tragic complications during childbirth. And unfortunately, in the first episode, fans had to witness one such death. Queen Aemma Targaryen had no agency and ended up dying painfully. Even by Game of Thrones standards, it was too cruel. The fact that her child doesn't even survive the ordeal is the exact kind of bitter cruelty you'd expect to see in Game of Thrones. Still, some fans felt like the scene was a little too graphic and a little too early. It made many viewers feel uncomfortable, and at the time, they probably didn't even know it was just one of the many difficult birthing scenes in the show. Like, what was up with that? That said, it's not the only disturbing scene, because just about everything involving King Viserys and Alicent was pure cringe. Sure, the age gap between the two may not be as uncomfortable back then, but that doesn't make it any less icky to watch, especially because Alicent was forced into the relationship by her conniving father, all so he could get closer to the king and attain more power. It just feels so wrong. Even if Viserys treated Alicent properly, she was still just a teenage girl when the two first met, and seeing her trying to subtly seduce the king at the request of her father made my skin crawl. The worst part is probably that Viserys even accepts her advances and takes her as his wife. Like, come on! The show actually had pretty explicit scenes between the two, and Alicent's blank expression in all of them only added to the overall ickiness. Speaking of weird relationships, I've got to mention the weird thing between Daemon and Rhaenyra. Incest in the Game of Thrones. It's like they just can't get enough of it. In House of the Dragon, fans were introduced to another family tree with some pretty twisted branches. Daemon and Rhaenyra are uncle and niece, and their relationship is the most awkward thing ever. But it gets even worse. Daemon's been grooming Rhaenyra since she was a kid, which is just plain creepy. Sure, Rhaenyra is grown up now, but that doesn't make their relationship any less gross. The worst part is probably when they actually end up tying the knot. The show tries to sell it as romantic, but let's face it, it's just plain weird. If this is what they mean by keeping it in the family, then count me out. Honestly, I was surprised to see people shipping them as some sort of power couple, especially when it's pretty obvious that even after their marriage, Daemon continued to be abusive.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents.
Like he literally choked Rhaenyra in the finale because he couldn't control his anger. Doesn't really seem like a model husband, or uncle for that matter, but I'm only really scraped the surface of the times when the show went too far, because Viserys' illness was shown way too graphically. His family wasn't the only thing decaying over the years, because Viserys' body was falling apart just as much.
Viserys is my true-born grandson. And you no more than the second son.
From the start, the king was inflicted with a strange disease that resulted in a bad cough and wounds that never healed. But that's just the beginning, folks. As time goes on, the wounds become more graphic and grotesque. Think pus-filled sores, rotting skin, and teeth falling out. It's not the first time fans have been shown body horror in the show, but it's definitely one of the most graphic depictions. And so, I'd say it's not for the faint-hearted. Despite his illness, Viserys is still a good guy, so watching his condition deteriorate is hard. It's like seeing a piece of bread slowly turn into moldy toast. The showrunners really milked his suffering, drawing it out over several episodes. This was almost as painful for the viewers as it was for Viserys. By the end, he looked like a walking skeleton, and all fans could do was pray for his misery to end.
I said I'm fine.
But long drawn-out illnesses aren't the only way the show makes its characters suffer. It's just as likely to brutally murder them on the spot, like how Criston Cole straight up murdered Joffrey Lonmouth. The idea of honor is taken super seriously in Westeros, but it's clearly not something that Criston Cole is concerned about. When he gets rejected by Rhaenyra, his attitude changes, and he becomes violent and abusive. He does some terrible things, which understandably makes him a hated character. Cole's actions become more and more depraved, and at one point, he just crosses a line. Cole brutally murdered Joffrey Lonmouth, and fans are ready to write him off. He doesn't just stop there, though. In the penultimate episode of Season 1, he really goes too far by killing Lord Beesbury in a disgustingly brutal way. It's almost too much for fans to handle, and I'm sure everyone's counting down to the day when Cole gets his comeuppance. Speaking of characters that definitely need to get what's coming to them, I've got to highlight Aegon. Every second this guy was on screen could be a moment worthy of this list, but there are a couple of moments where he really went too far. And yep, it's whatever he did to Diana. She's an innocent maid who was assaulted by Aegon II. The audience is not shown what happened to the poor girl, but her terror and fear were enough to let us know it was something vile. Diana is shown to be crying and shaking from whatever it was that Aegon did. Despite Alicent's gentleness with Diana, she offers her little consolation or help. To add insult to injury, Diana only receives a small payment and moon tea to keep Aegon's name clean. This scene is tragic and goes too far. Fans are outraged at the injustice Diana suffers, and it's not hard to empathize with her plight. She's just one of many innocent victims caught up in the Game of Thrones. There's no shortage of vile men in Westeros, and Larys Strong is among them. He might look meek and unassuming, but don't be fooled. He's one of the most manipulative and heinous characters in House of the Dragon. Larys is willing to lie and murder to achieve his goals, and not even Alicent Hightower is safe from his twisted schemes. In Episode 9, he takes his manipulation to a new low. The guy blackmails Alicent into showing him her feet in exchange for information about Aegon II. It's uncomfortable to watch as Alicent reluctantly gives into his demands, and it's clear that this isn't the first time Larys has used his power to violate her. The scene might not be graphic, but it's still disturbing to witness, and many fans felt that it crossed a line. Honestly, who knew that feet could be so powerful? It just goes to show you that you should always keep your toes covered around Larys Strong. Anyway, which of these moments did you think truly went too far, even by Game of Thrones standards?